The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker and Major John Jerstad climbed into their B-24 Liberator at Benghazi Airfield in Libya on August 1, 1943. The aircraft had a name painted on its nose, Hell's Winch, and it would live up to that name before the day ended. Around them, 178 heavy bombers prepared for what would become the longest and lowest bombing raid in history, a mission so dangerous that intelligence officers predicted half the men wouldn't come home. Baker was 36 years old and carried the weight of command for the entire 93rd Bomb Group. He had 11 months of combat experience, enough to know exactly what they were flying into. Jerstad was just 25, and here's the thing that makes his story remarkable. He had already completed his required 25 missions 3 weeks earlier. His war was over. He could have packed his bags and gone home to Oregon, but when Baker needed experienced pilots for this mission, Jerstad volunteered to fly one more time. That decision would cost him everything. The target was the Ploiești oil refineries in Romania, massive industrial complexes that supplied 30% of Nazi Germany's fuel. Every gallon of gasoline refined at Ploiești-powered German tanks rolling across Russia, Luftwaffe fighters intercepting Allied bombers over Europe, and U-boats hunting convoys in the Atlantic. Destroying these refineries could shorten the war by months and save thousands of Allied lives. But the price would be steep. Operation Tidal Wave required a 2,400-mile round trip at altitudes between 50 and 500 feet, which meant flying at treetop level the entire way. The Luftwaffe and German anti-aircraft crews had transformed Ploiești into the most heavily defended target in Europe after previous high-altitude raids had failed miserably. The only way to destroy the refineries was to fly directly through the defenses at chimney height, drop delayed fuse bombs, and pray the explosions didn't catch your own aircraft on the way out. The 8th Air Force had already lost 47 B-24s during training exercises for this mission. Pilots misjudged altitude over water, flew into hillsides during low-level practice runs, and collided in tight formations. Command estimated they would lose 90 aircraft over the target, which meant 900 men. Baker knew these numbers, had studied them, had briefed his crews on them. Jerstad knew them too, and he volunteered anyway. Hell's Winch carried 10 crew members that morning. Navigator Harold Sweetman, Bombardier John McCormick, Engineer James Merritt, Radio Operator Cecil Fike, and 4 gunners whose job was to keep enemy fighters off their tail. Every single man understood the statistics. 1 in 2 aircraft wouldn't return, but they also understood what was at stake. Ploiești produced 12 million barrels of refined petroleum annually, and every day those refineries operated, the war continued. Baker had briefed his group 3 times, emphasizing timing above everything else because the entire attack depended on 5 bomb groups reaching their targets simultaneously at exactly 9:30 a.m. Romanian time. The plan was to spread defensive fire thin and overwhelm anti-aircraft crews, but any delay meant concentrated defenses and certain disaster. Each group had specific refineries to destroy, and the 93rd would attack the Astra Romana and Columbia Aquila refineries. Baker's aircraft would lead the formation, set the example, and show his men the way through hell. At 7 o'clock, engines thundered across Benghazi airfield as 178 B-24s lifted into the morning sky, formed up over the Mediterranean, and turned north toward Romania. The formation stretched for miles at 19,000 feet altitude initially, but they would drop to wave-top height over the Aegean Sea, stay low across Greece and Yugoslavia, and reach Ploiești below German radar. Baker settled into his seat while Jerstad took the co-pilot position, and Hell's Winch flew in the lead spot with 17 aircraft from the 93rd following. Directly behind, 3 hours into the mission, disaster struck before they even reached the target. A B-24 from the lead navigation group lost power over the Mediterranean, and it wasn't just any aircraft, it was the bomber carrying the mission's lead navigator. The plane descended toward the water attempting an emergency landing, hit the waves at 140 miles per hour, and disintegrated completely. All crew members were lost instantly, and more importantly, the entire operation had just lost its pathfinder. No backup navigator knew the complete route, and Baker watched the formation continue north knowing something was already terribly wrong. The formation crossed the Greek coast at 9,000 feet and descended to 500 feet over Yugoslavia, flying so low that pilots could see individual trees and sheep scattering as bombers roared overhead. The plan called for terrain masking because German radar stations couldn't track aircraft flying below hilltops, but low altitude meant fuel consumption increased and navigational errors became critical. A wrong turn at this altitude could send the entire formation into a mountainside. Baker checked his instruments and saw fuel consumption normal and engines running steady, while behind him, 17 B-24s from the 93rd maintained tight formation. To his left and right, other bomb groups spread across the sky. The 44th, the 98th, the 376th, and the 389th. 5 groups, 177 aircraft still flying, one target 30 minutes away. At 9:05 a.m. Romanian time, the formation reached the initial point near Floresti, the spot where bombers would turn toward Ploesti, and this was the critical navigation moment. Every group needed to identify landmarks, turn at precisely the right moment, and follow the correct valleys toward their assigned refineries. But without the lead navigator, the mission commander's aircraft took over navigation duties. Baker watched the lead group begin their turn, and his blood went cold. They turned toward Bucharest, the wrong city, the wrong direction entirely. The lead group had mistaken one valley for another, a simple navigational mistake at 500 feet altitude, but Bucharest lay 30 miles southeast of Ploesti. The lead group was taking 3 bomb groups, over 100 aircraft, away from the target and away from the mission. The attack plan was collapsing in real time. Baker grabbed the radio transmitter and tried desperately to contact the mission commander because this was an emergency and the mission was about to fail completely. Radio discipline had been strict throughout the flight with minimal transmissions because German listening posts were tracking them, but Baker called repeatedly anyway. No response came back. Either the lead aircraft wasn't monitoring the frequency or they couldn't hear through the radio interference, and German jamming had started the moment the formation crossed into Romania. Static filled the airwaves, and Jurstad looked at Baker with a question in his eyes. The decision was brutally simple. Follow the lead group to the wrong target and waste the entire mission, or break formation. Turn the 93rd toward Ploesti alone, and lead 17 aircraft into the most heavily defended target in Europe without the planned support from other groups. No simultaneous attack, no split defenses, and every German gun would focus on the 93rd. Command had predicted 50% losses with the full formation attacking together, so what would losses be with one group attacking alone? Baker made his decision in 5 seconds. He banked Hell's Winch hard left away from the lead group and toward Ploesti, and behind him, every aircraft in the 93rd followed without hesitation. 17 B-24s broke from the main formation, and the original attack plan that called for 94 bombers hitting Ploesti together now consisted of Baker leading 18 bombers toward targets designed to be attacked by 5 times that number. German radar operators watched the formation split and immediately alerted flak battery commanders. American bombers approaching from the south, small group, 18 aircraft, altitude 500 feet, speed 210 miles per hour. Every available gun crew in Ploesti received the same order. Concentrate all fire on this group and stop them before they reach the refineries. Baker flew toward the smokestacks of Astra Romana, 11 miles ahead, 10 minutes flying time, and Jurstad scanned the horizon through the co-pilot window. Black smoke was already rising over the city, but something else caught his attention. Small dark shapes lifting from the ground around the refineries, dozens of them, then hundreds. Barrage balloons with steel cables dangling beneath them, specifically designed to destroy low-flying bombers. The cables would shred wings, tear through fuselage, and rip engines from mountings, and Ploesti defenders had raised every balloon in the city. Hell's Winch was flying directly into a forest of steel. At 9:17 a.m., Hell's Winch entered the Ploesti defense zone at 470 feet altitude, and the city sprawled ahead with 7 major refineries, miles of pipelines, cracking towers, storage tanks, smokestacks belching black smoke, and above everything, 300 barrage balloons. Each cable was designed to catch aircraft wings, snap them off, and send bombers tumbling into the ground. But Baker had no choice about altitude. The mission required bombing from chimney height because delayed fuses needed time to arm, and if they dropped from normal bombing altitude, the bombs would explode before penetrating deep into refinery structures. The entire mission depended on flying low and flying through those cables. The 93rd crews had trained for this, practiced low-level bombing runs over desert targets in Libya, but training targets didn't shoot back and training balloons didn't have steel cables. Behind Hell's Winch, 17 B-24s followed in tight formation with nose gunners tracking the balloons ahead and top turret gunners searching for fighters. The Luftwaffe had stationed 200 fighters at airfields around Ploesti, Messerschmitt 109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, and Romanian IR-81s. Intelligence had predicted waves of fighter attacks during the bomb run, but so far, no fighters appeared because German commanders were holding them back. The flak batteries would handle the bombers first. The first 88mm shell exploded 200 feet ahead of Hell's Winch with black smoke and orange flash as shrapnel sprayed outward. Baker flew straight through the blast, and the aircraft shuddered violently. More explosions erupted across the sky as German gun crews found their range. The Ploesti defenses included 237 flak guns, dozens of anti-aircraft batteries, and machine gun nests on rooftops, and every gun opened fire. Simultaneously, the sky filled with tracers, red lines streaking toward the formation, and black puffs of exploding shells so dense that pilots couldn't see through the barrage. A balloon cable appeared directly ahead without warning, and Baker yanked the controls left hard. Hell's Winch banked sharply, and the cable passed 20 feet from the right wing. Another cable appeared to the left, and Baker rolled right, flying through the forest and dodging cables that materialized through the smoke. Jurstad called out positions frantically, cable high left, cable low right, and Baker flew by pure instinct. The refineries were 3 miles ahead, 3 more minutes, and the formation had to stay together and reach the target no matter what. An 88mm shell detonated beneath Hell's Winch, and the explosion lifted the aircraft 30 feet straight up. Shrapnel tore through the belly, punctured fuel tanks, and ripped through hydraulic lines. Red warning lights flashed across the instrument panel as fuel pressure dropped in number 3 engine and oil temperature rose in number 1. The aircraft was bleeding mechanical life, but the engines still ran and the controls still responded, so Baker kept flying. 2 miles from target, another barrage balloon loomed ahead, and Baker aimed between 2 cables, calculated the gap at 40 feet clearance on each side, which was enough room if nothing went wrong. He committed to the path and pushed the throttles forward, but then the aircraft jolted with a hard impact on the right wing. The B-24 had clipped a cable Baker hadn't seen through the smoke, and the steel wire scraped along the wing leading edge, tearing aluminum. The wire caught on the outboard engine nacelle and held tight, which meant the balloon was now attached to Hell's winch. 300 pounds of rubber and canvas dragged on the right wing, creating massive asymmetric drag, and the aircraft pulled hard right. Baker fought the controls with everything he had, struggled to maintain heading, and then another shell exploded. This one struck directly, an 88mm round punching through the right wing root and the fuel tank. Aviation gas sprayed into the engine compartment where hot metal was sparking and electrical systems were exposed, and the mixture ignited instantly. Orange flames erupted from the wing and spread rapidly toward the fuselage. Hell's winch was on fire. 1 mile from target, 60 seconds to the release point, and Baker looked down to see an open field below, flat and clear, perfect for an emergency landing. They could set down safely right now. The entire crew could survive, walk away from this mission, but that would mean abandoning everything. Baker kept the nose pointed straight at Astra Romana refinery. The fire spread across the entire right wing as flames reached back toward the fuselage, and the metal skin glowed cherry red. Temperature inside the cockpit climbed rapidly and smoke filled the interior, making it hard to breathe. The crew could bail out right now. The open field below meant everyone could parachute safely, or Baker could set the aircraft down and execute an emergency landing. Mission failed, but everyone lives. The problem was that 17 B-24s were following directly behind Hell's winch, and if Baker landed now, those aircraft would follow his lead. The entire 93rd would abort, and the mission would fail completely. Jerstad understood the calculation immediately because he'd flown 25 missions before this, survived impossible odds, and earned his ticket home. Now he sat in a burning bomber with a choice between survival and mission completion, and he didn't reach for the bailout lever. He didn't suggest landing. Instead, he checked the bomb release panel, verified the delayed fuses were armed, and prepared for the drop. Baker understood what that meant. They were continuing no matter what happened next. The flames grew worse every second as fire consumed the right wing from engine nacelle to wing tip. The aluminum structure began failing from heat stress as rivets popped and metal panels curled. The wing was literally disintegrating in flight, but it still produced lift somehow, and the aircraft still flew. 45 seconds to target, and the bomb bay doors were already open. Bombardier John McCormick lay prone in the nose, watching the refinery approach through the Norden bomb site with cracking towers, storage tanks, and pipeline networks dead ahead. The primary structures filled his view completely. Behind Hell's winch, the 93rd formation held together despite everything, and every pilot saw the flames. Every crew member knew their lead aircraft was dying right in front of them. But Baker hadn't turned away and hadn't landed, so the formation followed him anyway. 17 B-24s flew through the flak barrage, through the balloon cables, through smoke so thick that visibility dropped to 100 feet, and they followed Hell's winch because Baker and Jerstad were still flying. German gunners concentrated their entire firepower on the burning bomber, every tracer, every shell, because if they stopped the lead aircraft, the formation would break apart completely. 88mm rounds exploded continuously around Hell's Winch, and one shell detonated so close that shrapnel shredded the left horizontal stabilizer. The aircraft yawed violently, and Baker fought the controls, using rudder and ailerons together to keep the nose steady because the bomb sight required stable flight. Any deviation meant missed target, wasted mission, and wasted lives. 30 seconds to target, and the refineries filled the entire windscreen. Cracking towers rose 300 feet high, and Hell's Winch flew between them at 400 feet altitude with wings level and speed steady despite everything. The fire had reached the fuselage now, and flames licked along the cockpit windows as paint blistered and glass cracked from heat. Oxygen masks provided breathable air, but the temperature was unbearable and Baker's hands were literally blistering on the control yoke. He held course anyway. McCormick centered the crosshairs and knew the delayed fuse bombs would penetrate buildings before exploding to cause maximum structural damage and destroy the refining equipment. He waited for the precise release point, calculated drop trajectory while accounting for wind, altitude, and speed. The numbers aligned perfectly, and he pressed the release. 4,000 pounds of high explosive dropped from the bomb bay and fell toward the Astra Romana facility. Hell's Winch lurched upward as the weight released, and behind Baker, the entire formation released simultaneously. 18 aircraft, 72,000 pounds of bombs with delayed fuses that meant the explosions would occur in devastating waves. First bombs penetrating deep into structures, then detonating, then the next wave, then the next until the entire refinery was destroyed, but Hell's Winch was still inside the blast radius. Baker pulled back on the yoke and tried desperately to gain altitude, to get above the coming explosions, but the right wing barely responded because fire had destroyed the control surfaces. The aircraft climbed slowly at 100 feet per minute, which wasn't nearly enough. The bombs would detonate in 18 seconds, and the blast radius extended 1,000 feet in every direction. Hell's Winch was 400 feet above ground, 500 feet past the target, still climbing, still burning, and the wing structure was failing completely. The fire had reached the center fuel tanks, and below them, 18 seconds had just expired. The first explosion erupted beneath Hell's Winch as a delayed fuse bomb detonated inside the main cracking tower. The structure disintegrated instantly, and steel beams shot outward in every direction. The blast wave hit the burning B-24 like a physical wall, and the aircraft tumbled and rolled 30 degrees right. Baker fought the controls desperately and somehow leveled the wings. More explosions followed in rapid succession as bombs penetrated deep into refinery buildings before exploding. The entire Astra Romana facility was collapsing around them with fireballs rising 300 feet and black smoke mushrooming upward. The 93rd had hit the target perfectly, but the cost was only beginning. Behind Hell's Winch, the formation scattered as each B-24 peeled away from the target area and sought escape routes through the flak, through the smoke, through the balloon cables that still hung everywhere. Some aircraft made clean breaks, climbed rapidly, and turned south toward Libya. Others weren't fortunate at all. A B-24 from the 93rd hit a balloon cable at full speed, and the wire caught the left wing and sheared it off completely. The bomber rolled inverted, crashed into a storage tank, and exploded in a massive fireball. 10 men died instantly with no chance of escape. Another B-24 took a direct hit from an 88mm shell that penetrated the bomb bay and detonated the remaining bombs still on their racks. The aircraft vanished in an orange fireball and fragments scattered across 200 yards. No parachutes appeared, no survivors. A third bomber flew directly through a concentrated flak barrage, and 20mm rounds stitched across the fuselage, killing the pilot instantly and wounding the co-pilot. The aircraft nosed down, struck the ground at 200 miles per hour, and cartwheeled through a residential area. 14 Romanian civilians died alongside the American crew. The 93rd was paying the predicted price, and then some. Command had estimated 50% casualties with full formation support, but Baker's group was attacking alone with 1/5 the planned aircraft against the full defensive capability of Ploesti. The mathematics were absolutely brutal. 18 bombers entered the target zone, and 4 were already gone forever. 40 men were dead, and the survivors were still fighting their way out through the maelstrom. Hell's Winch climbed through the smoke at 800 feet while still burning intensely. The right wing was completely engulfed in flames that had spread to the fuselage, and the cockpit filled with black smoke that reduced visibility to zero. Baker flew by instruments alone, watching airspeed, altitude, and heading while the gauges showed critical damage everywhere. Number 3 engine had seized completely. Number 4 was losing oil pressure rapidly. Number 1 was running dangerously hot, and only Number 2 operated normally. The aircraft was flying on 1 functioning engine and 3 dying ones, which shouldn't have been possible at all. Jurstad scanned the instruments and checked fuel levels to find both right-wing tanks completely empty and ruptured by flak. Leaking fuel had fed the fire that was consuming them, and the left-wing tanks showed half capacity, which meant maybe 30 minutes of flying time remained. The Mediterranean coast was 90 minutes south, and the math was simple. They wouldn't make it anywhere close. The aircraft was dying faster than they could fly, but they'd climbed to 800 feet, which was high enough for parachutes to deploy safely. The crew could bail out right now. All 10 men could survive, and they would land in Romanian territory to become prisoners of war, but at least they'd be alive. Baker assessed their situation with cold clarity. The mission was complete, and the 93rd had destroyed their assigned targets. Bombs had devastated the Astra Romana refinery completely, and the other bombers were escaping as best they could. Some would make it back to Libya, and some wouldn't, but the attack had succeeded. Germany's fuel supply was crippled, and the cost had been enormous. At least 4 aircraft lost, probably more, and Hell's Winch was finished with no possibility of reaching friendly territory. The smart decision, the obvious decision, was immediate bailout to save the crew. But Baker knew the harsh statistics about bailing out over Romania because it meant capture, interrogation, prison camp, and years of captivity. Some crew members wouldn't survive those conditions with disease, malnutrition, and brutal treatment. And if Germany lost the war, which seemed increasingly likely, some prisoners might never make it home at all because executions happened and massacres occurred when the SS decided prisoners were inconvenient. Baker made another calculation in seconds. Hell's Winch still flew despite everything, damaged and burning and dying, but flying nonetheless. If he could gain more altitude, the crew could bail out over Yugoslavia instead, which was partisan territory where friendly forces operated. Yugoslav partisans rescued downed airmen regularly and smuggled them back to Allied lines. So higher altitude meant longer glide distance after the engines failed and a better chance of reaching partisan zones. But gaining altitude meant staying in the burning aircraft longer, and the fire was spreading faster now. Time was running out with every passing second. Baker pulled back on the yoke, and Hell's Winch climbed slowly through 900 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet. Every 100 feet of altitude bought the crew better survival odds after bailout. But the climb cost precious time that the burning aircraft simply didn't have. The fire had consumed half the fuselage now, and flames burned through electrical systems. The radio went completely dead, and the intercom failed next, which meant Baker could no longer communicate with the crew at all. He couldn't order bailout, couldn't coordinate evacuation, and each man would have to make his own decision about when to jump. The engineer, James Merritt, stood in the cockpit doorway and watched Baker and Jerstad fight the controls. He saw the flames spreading rapidly toward the cockpit and felt the heat radiating through the metal walls like an oven. He understood exactly what Baker was attempting: gain altitude to give everyone a better chance at survival after bailout. Merritt returned to his station without a word and didn't bail out. He stayed at his post, monitored the dying engines, adjusted fuel mixture, and transferred fuel from damaged tanks to functioning ones to buy them precious extra minutes. Behind Merritt, the four gunners remained at their positions instead of heading for the escape hatches. The top turret gunner tracked the sky for enemy fighters. Waist gunners watched for pursuing Messerschmitts, and the tail gunners scanned their 6 o'clock position continuously. No fighters appeared because the Luftwaffe had pulled back completely. German commanders knew Hell's winch was finished and saw no need to waste ammunition on a bomber that would crash on its own very soon. The gunners could see the ground through gaps in the smoke below them: Romanian countryside, fields, villages, enemy territory in every direction. They stayed at their stations anyway. 1,500 feet now, and the aircraft shuddered violently as number 4 engine seized completely. The propeller windmilled uselessly and created massive drag on one side. Baker compensated with rudder pressure, and the aircraft yawed hard right, but he fought it back level with pure strength. 3 engines remained operational. Number 1 was running on failing oil pressure. Number 2 was still good somehow, and number 3 had restarted after cooling briefly. But the restart wouldn't last because the engine was damaged and running rough while producing minimal power. The right wing was structurally failing in real time as the fire burned through primary spars and load-bearing members. The wing bent upward under aerodynamic stress and metal groaned ominously. Rivets popped like gunshots throughout the structure, and the wing was literally folding upward. When it failed completely, the aircraft would roll inverted instantly and spin into the ground with no time for bailout. Everyone would die in the crash without any chance of escape. Baker needed altitude desperately before that happened, needed to get high enough that when the wing finally failed, the crew could escape the tumbling aircraft. 1,700 feet, and they were 15 miles south of Ploesti now, still over Romania, and still enemy territory, but closer to Yugoslavia with every second. The partisan zones were 40 miles ahead, and if they could maintain altitude for another 10 minutes, they'd reach friendly territory where the crew could bail out safely, get rescued by partisans, and eventually return to fight another day. Baker pushed the aircraft harder and demanded performance it simply couldn't give anymore. The remaining engines screamed in protest, overheated dangerously, and began failing one after another. Number 1 engine caught fire with a different kind of blaze from the wing fire. This one burned inside the nacelle as engine oil ignited and flames shot from the cowling. The fire spread rapidly to number 2 engine, which was the only engine still producing full power and their last hope. Baker watched his last good engine start to burn and knew he had maybe 90 seconds before complete power loss. 90 seconds to gain every possible foot of altitude before they became a glider. He kept climbing anyway. Bombardier McCormick lay in the nose position and watched the ground pass beneath while calculating their trajectory. Airspeed was dropping, altitude was increasing slowly, and rate of climb was decreasing steadily. The mathematics were brutally clear. They wouldn't make Yugoslavia at all. The engines would fail before they crossed the border, and the aircraft would crash in Romania. But McCormick didn't move toward the escape hatch and didn't prepare to bail out. He stayed at his station and trusted Baker's judgment completely. 1,900 feet, and number 2 engine simply died. No explosion, no dramatic failure, just silence. The engine quit, starved of oil and seized from heat, and it was gone. Now Hell's winch flew on 2 damaged engines, number 3 running rough and number 1 burning actively. The aircraft couldn't maintain altitude anymore and started descending at 100 feet per minute, then 200. The descent accelerated rapidly, and Baker had run completely out of options. The crew had maybe 60 seconds to bail out before the aircraft became uncontrollable, and he needed to give the order immediately. But the intercom was dead, and he couldn't tell them to jump. The right wing chose that exact moment to fail catastrophically. The right wing separated at the root, and the entire structure tore away from the fuselage. 28 feet of wing, 2 engines, and fuel tanks, all gone in one catastrophic failure. The sudden loss of lift on one side rolled Hell's winch violently, and the aircraft snap-rolled left and inverted in 2 seconds flat. The centrifugal force pinned everyone against the walls and made movement completely impossible. Escape hatches were now above the crew, and gravity worked against them. No one could reach the exits at all. Baker fought the controls uselessly because with one wing gone, aerodynamic forces overwhelmed any control input. The rudder had no effect, ailerons couldn't counter the roll, and the aircraft was tumbling wildly while spinning toward the ground in an uncontrollable descent. Through the windscreen, Baker saw earth and sky alternating rapidly as the horizon spun. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 1,800 feet, 1,600, 1,400, descending at 3,000 feet per minute straight down. The crew knew what was happening and felt the violent roll and understood the wing had failed completely. Merritt grabbed desperately for handholds but couldn't reach them as the centrifugal force threw him against the bulkhead. The gunners tumbled through the fuselage, slammed into equipment, into each other, and into the burning walls. McCormick in the nose watched the ground rush upward and calculated impact in 28 seconds. He didn't scream and didn't panic, just watched it come. Jerstad remained strapped in the co-pilot seat because the harness held him secure despite the violent rotation. He looked at Baker across the cockpit, and both men knew this was the absolute end. No bailout possible, no emergency landing, no survival. The aircraft was a spinning coffin plummeting toward Earth. They'd completed the mission, led the 93rd to the target, destroyed the refinery, and kept flying when they could have landed safely. They'd made the choice, and this was the consequence. 1,000 feet, and the spin accelerated as aerodynamic forces increased with airspeed. The aircraft rotated faster at 4 revolutions per second. The remaining left wing began failing under the stress, and metal screamed. The fire spread throughout the entire fuselage and consumed everything. The ammunition for the 50 caliber guns began cooking off and rounds exploded randomly, sending bullets ricocheting through the interior and adding chaos to the catastrophe. The ground details became clearly visible: trees, a road, farm buildings, and Romanian farmers working in fields. They looked up and saw the burning bomber spinning downward with black smoke trailing behind it in a corkscrew pattern. The sound was immense with screaming engines, rushing wind, and exploding ammunition. The farmers ran and scattered away from the impact point because they knew exactly what was coming. 600 feet, and Hell's winch completed its final rotation with the nose pointed almost straight down. The remaining engines still ran, and still pushed the aircraft faster toward the ground. Baker saw the impact point clearly, a field of bare earth where the aircraft would hit at over 300 miles per hour. The impact would be instantaneous, no pain, no drawn-out death, just sudden ending. 300 feet, and Jerstad reached across the cockpit and gripped Baker's shoulder in a final gesture of acknowledgement. They'd flown together, made the hard choice together, and would die together. Baker nodded once and kept his hands on the controls because he died doing his job, a pilot to the very end. Hell's winch struck the earth at exactly 9:47 a.m. Romanian time, and 3,500 pounds of remaining fuel detonated on impact. The explosion created a crater 15 feet deep and 40 feet across, and debris scattered across 200 yards in every direction. The aircraft disintegrated completely, and all 10 crew members died instantly. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker, Major John Jerstad, Navigator Harold Sweetman, Bombardier John McCormick, Engineer James Merritt, Radio Operator Cecil Fike, and 4 gunners whose bodies were later identified by dog tags recovered from the wreckage. The volunteer who didn't have to fly, the commander who led from the front, and 8 men who followed them into hell, all gone in an instant. Romanian authorities arrived within the hour and recovered what remained of 10 Americans who'd flown 1,500 miles to destroy oil refineries, who'd succeeded completely, and who'd paid the ultimate price. The bodies were buried in a local cemetery with graves marked by wooden crosses, and the war continued without them. But their mission had changed everything. Operation Tidal Wave concluded at 10:32 a.m. on August 1, 1943, and the final accounting was devastating. 178 B-24 liberators had departed Benghazi that morning, and 125 returned home. 53 aircraft were lost forever, 310 airmen were killed, 54 were captured, and 108 were wounded. It was the single costliest air mission in American military history to that point, and the losses exceeded even the worst predictions. Command had estimated 50% casualties, but the actual figure reached 30% for aircraft. Among the crews that pressed their attacks all the way to the target, losses approached 60%. The 93rd Bomb Group paid the heaviest price of all. Addison Baker had led 18 bombers toward Ploesti after breaking formation, and only 11 returned to Libya. 7 aircraft were lost, and 70 men were dead or missing. But those 18 bombers had destroyed their assigned targets completely. The Astra Romana refinery was knocked offline for 3 months, and the Columbia Aquila facility remained closed for 6 months. Delayed fuse bombs had penetrated deep into critical equipment. Cracking towers collapsed, pipeline networks ruptured, and storage tanks burned for days afterward. German engineers surveyed the damage and reported that complete reconstruction would take years. Across Ploesti, the other bomb groups achieved similar devastating results. The refineries that supplied 1/3 of Nazi Germany's fuel were crippled completely. Daily production dropped from 12 million barrels annually to less than 4 million. The shortfall created immediate problems for German operations across every front. Luftwaffe sortie rates decreased significantly, panzer divisions received reduced fuel allocations, and U-boats spent less time on patrol. The strategic impact rippled throughout the entire Wehrmacht. Some historians estimate Operation Tidal Wave shortened the war in Europe by 3 months and saved countless Allied lives. But the cost haunted military planners for years afterward. 53 aircraft and 310 men lost in a single day. The mathematics were absolutely brutal. Command evaluated whether the results justified the losses, whether destroying oil refineries was worth the price in American lives. The debate continued throughout the war, and no clear answer ever emerged. The oil was crucial to the German war effort, and the losses were catastrophic. Both facts remained equally true. The Medal of Honor citations arrived 6 months later, and 5 men received America's highest military decoration for actions during Operation Tidal Wave. It was more medals of honor than any other single air operation in history. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker received his posthumously, and the citation read that he flew his burning aircraft to the target despite having opportunity to land safely, led his group through the heaviest defenses in Europe, and completed the mission at cost of his life and the lives of his crew. Major John Jerstad received his Medal of Honor posthumously as well. The citation noted he had volunteered for the mission after completing his required tour of duty, served as Baker's co-pilot, remained at his post in the burning aircraft, made the choice to continue when survival was possible, and died completing the mission. He was 25 years old, had finished his war, and could have gone home to Oregon. Instead, he flew one more mission and never returned. The other 8 crew members of Hell's Winch received no individual medals, and their names appeared only in casualty lists. Harold Sweetman, John McCormick, James Merritt, Cecil Fike, and 4 gunners whose families received telegrams explaining their sons had died in action over Romania. Standard wartime notifications that said nothing about what they'd actually done, nothing that explained they'd flown a burning bomber through the worst defenses in Europe because their commanders asked them to, and because the mission